Back to the grind, Chris.
Oh, don't. I need some Panadol. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Undiscovered text adventures abound. It's XOIF 2.
New life for PlayStation and Wii. Breakthroughs in dev tools and operating systems are invigorating older consoles.
Video editing like it's 1999. We look at a new Pi-based replacement for mini DV tapes, kind of.
And PicoGus news, along with a great new resource for arcade machine maintenance, coming up on this week's show for the week of Saturday, the 18th of April, 2026. Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Welcome back, Chris. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad.
That was your opportunity to open the show blown, Chris.
Oh, it was, wasn't it? Oh, well.
It was waiting there.
Back as normal. Yeah, good. No, I had good time off. Thank you for allowing me the time off. Had a good time with my schoolmate from the UK who was a big Amiga fan. Started off with the ST, then onto the Amiga. Commodore 64 before the ST, in fact. So, of course, we did some old school gaming, went to the Palace Arcade. And I think there's one, Hoffman will know what I'm talking about. I sent him a short video clip where I decided to play some Atari 2600 games with Lee whilst listening to Hoffman's vinyl. Thought Hoffman will love this, so I sent him a clip of that, and then he sent me a polite message pointing out to me that I was playing it at the wrong speed.
We were quite intoxicated. We thought it sounded fantastic, but yeah, playing the record at the completely wrong speed. That's how much fun we had over the last 3 weeks. So yeah, enjoyed it.
Will your feature segment just be a slideshow, just a 15-minute slideshow of your vacation?
No one ever wants to see. You take 1,000 photos these days and you look back at none. I'll tell you what, I'll give Duncan, for those watching on YouTube, one video. One photo. We went to a place called The Pinnacles, which is about 2 hours north of Perth. It's a desolate area with these interesting rock formations, but we specifically went there at night so that Lee could get a good view of the Milky Way, because you get dark skies, you get a good view of the Milky Way. And so with the rocks of the Pinnacles in the foreground, managed to get astro mode on my phone working and a nice picture of the Milky Way in the background with the Southern Cross in frame as well. So I'm proud of that photo. So that's all you're getting of my holiday photos.
I would never expect you to come out with something as good as that, so I'm quite impressed. I would expect it to be a picture taken at a jaunty angle of you, absolutely messed up, holding a beer in one hand and a whiskey in the other.
Well, I was about to say every other photo is just a pub shot, so...
We had better get stuck in, or we'll be here all day before we get to stories. All three of us here, to speak in Scots phrasing, love a text adventure. And that just means we like text adventures. Of course, it's only really true in the literal sense of the phrase for Chris, because there's only one text adventure that he likes. He loves a text adventure. Jason, on the other hand, if any listeners were not aware, has another podcast, The Retro Adventurers, and that's just what they do. Interactive fiction, sorry. Must call it interactive fiction. Text adventures.
We call text adventures.
I get into text adventures as a kid, and eventually get into MUDs, which are online text adventures for multiplayer. But even before MUDs, I loved text adventures. And as the Infocom advert famously says, we unleash the world's most powerful graphics technology, and it's got a picture of the brain. Now, on to today's submission, and it's from Dutch Magic, thank you very much, and it's the release of XOIF 2. The XO project, if you've been living under a rock, and something that actually living under a rock I'd recommend these days with all that's going on in the world. But the XO project is a set of projects covering a specific thing each. XO DOS being the original, but there's XO Demo Scene, XO Win9X, XO 3X, XO Scum VM, etc. And without any exaggeration at all, I think XO is one of the most important things to have happened in retro. You could even argue that if you look across the past maybe 10 years, it's the most important. Now, Jason originally covered release 1 of XOIF, and it was amazing in its first release. But less than a year later, they've more than doubled the size of it. The first one had 900 unique games and covered 50 platforms. So remember that number, 50. The new version has over 2,300 unique titles. And to celebrate the 50, the 50th anniversary of the OG, the Colossal Cave Adventure. It has 50 different versions of that one game in the pack. It's also gone up and more than doubled the number of platforms to 116. And I'm really surprised that there's 116 different platforms that got text adventures. The earliest game in the pack is from 1972, which is older even than me. Although not as old as I feel these days. The pack now contains not just more games, not just more systems, but a lot more depth. Something we've talked about the first time around, things that I thought were nice to have. So there are, as you can see behind me, I do like my box games. And I've always felt that since the game starts, when you see the box, when you open up the box and read the feelies and browses, getting that stuff is vital. And that's what's happened with version 2. Now, I did speak to EXO briefly, who suggested I speak to the guy that does the majority of the work on it, G. Schmittel. I ambushed him with short notice with some questions on it. And he told me that for the first pack, they went after anything that Moby Games considered to be interactive fiction, with the logic from EXO that it would be what people would be most familiar with. Beyond that, he says, we also added what showed up in various beloved blogs like Jason Dyer's, Renga and Blue, or the Digital Antiquarian, but deliberately excluded modern authoring systems aside from what was in Moby Games. He said that for Release 2, I just went all out and started looking through stuff like TOSEC, GameBase, and all sorts of tape and disc dumps on the Internet Archive, as well as the Solution Archive. One thing I wanted to address was adding more versions of the games that we had so people could play them as they remembered them, which is why there's now so many more systems for Infocom, Magnetic Scrolls, Level 9, etc. Naturally, when doing that, you keep finding references to more stuff, and so it went. I still try to concentrate on older games, but if I found something weird that was on one guy's Google Drive, I picked that up as well. I also went through a lot of sites to grab walkthroughs and maps for anything I could find. I'll have to mention both the people in EXO's Discord as well as Gaming Alexandria here, who have been invaluable in finding and getting things to run. One of them has gone on a bender trawling unadded ZX Spectrum games, and I believe he's nearing 2,000 of them. Not just me, Smiling Spectre in particular is doing the ZX collection, and various others have pointed out different sites or games to me, but overall, yes, I've kept going. He said the biggest treasure trove has been working with Robbie Showed, which I probably pronounced incorrectly, a frequent commenter on Renga, who has tirelessly surfaced tapes with things that haven't been seen for decades and concerted efforts to get them to run. You may remember the bombshell finds of 2025. That was all initiated by him. Jason, that look means that you know something about this?
No, this is me listening attentively.
Ah, okay. I thought you were about to say, oh, yeah, I heard all about that. No,
I'm actually not sure which one that is. I'll see if I can find it in the next 2 minutes, though.
He said, I think I'm through with most of the exotic systems, so it looks like it'll be mostly home computer from here on out, like all those Spectrum and C64 games. The one problem I have is almost impossible to find a good method to go through the games. CASA is a great resource, but not so good for browsing methodically. And of course, how could they not miss lots of things? I have roughly 300 games for various systems working already, waiting for the time-consuming part, metadata. I think Rob has publicly hinted we've made some incredible discoveries, but as they aren't easy to get running, if it is even possible to get running, if we manage that, they will go in as well. I also asked him about I noticed in the system list they have like level 9 there, which isn't a computer system itself, and it basically confirmed what I thought. It's when you had a Z machine for Infocom, level 9 had their own thing like magnetic, demagnetic, and so on. So it's another way to play the games directly in Windows without having to rely on having to know how to save the games in these emulators. So it's just to make it easier. And the last thing I asked him was if there's anything he wanted to add. And he said, please check out the 50 years of Colossal Cave. And in brackets, he says, God, I hope it all works. So what do you think, Chris? I know it's not your cup of tea. What do you think?
Oh, it's fantastic that they're being able to dig out even more text adventures. And it makes me wonder, what should I play? And I'm thinking, especially with the increase in numbers of games that they found for the Spectrum, What Spectrum? I fancy doing a text adventure on the Spectrum, even if I punish myself with the rubber keyboard. What do people recommend that I play on the ZX Spectrum? So I know Jason probably has some input on that. If not, people can, in the comments on YouTube or via the Reddit, whatever. Not official question of the week, but I would be interested to know what are the best text adventures on the Spectrum.
There's one I'm thinking of, Subsea Adventure. Subsea Delta,
Okay.
Subsea something. Sea-based Delta, that's the one.
Oh, okay. Sea-based Delta.
Yeah.
So I have the Rob Robo Show information. Yeah, this may have been something that didn't make it to the subreddit, but it was late last year. So there's SVHA Adventure, which was for some sort of Norwegian mainframe, and then a game called Ringen. I'm just reading from RoboShow's post here. An original adventure taking place in the Mines of Moria from Lord of the Rings, and that's also looks like those are both from 1979 thereabouts. So one of those 50 versions of Colossal Cave is probably this SVHA Adventure. I skimmed through the expanded game list. I didn't see a place where they conveniently highlighted this was what's new in this pack revision 2, so it was a little trickier to see just what had changed. I did notice that they addressed one of my concerns from revision 1. By the way, if you want to refresh yourself on the coverage, it was episode 226 from July of last year where we first talked about XOIF. And one of the things I pointed out was they had the Wyndham Classics version of Alice in Wonderland, which is really it's like a proto-Maniac Mansion kind of game. It's really not so much a text adventure. They had that in, but did not have its sibling Below the Root, which is the number one game I won't shut up about in there. And I said, well, that's weird. Why would you have one and not the other? They did put Below the Root in, but they are still drawing the line. They're keeping out the Sierra AGI games like King's Quest, even though they absolutely rely on text parsing. And they say, well, that's because you use the arrow keys to navigate. And I still say, so does Star Trek The Kobayashi Alternative, and that's in, but whatever. And they're also keeping out the Scum games, which are, again, very mechanically similar to that Alice game and Below the Root. But right, I mean, you got to draw boundaries someplace. They want to avoid overlap with their Scum VM pack. So I get that. One truism that we found on the Retro Adventurers is that when a game trumpets that it has, more rooms than other games, if anything, it might be worse than average. So, a lot more platforms might not itself mean all that much unless there are a lot of platform exclusive games. And these things like SVHA Adventure, where somebody has taken Colossal Cave and kind of tweaked it as they implemented it, which was very common back then. That's probably more what you'll find in the truly unique space. There were some platform exclusives. Somebody would put out a game on one platform and it just didn't catch fire and warrant a port to something else. So again, that may not be the bestest game, but as an archival source, that's certainly a great thing to have. So very cool to see XOIF with revision 2.
Yeah, I think the point about playing the game the way you played it originally is important. Being able to play, if you played it first on a Coco, being able to play it on the Coco and this is important. It did get me thinking. I love a little hardware project. I love an excuse to go and buy stuff and set it up. I was thinking, what if I get Windows 10 running XOIF, which was based on Launchbox, and I get an R70 graphics card because you can use something to force an R70 graphics card to output a 15 kilohertz VGA signal, and I get a nice amber CRT and plug that in, and I can sit and have XOIF on this beautiful amber screen as if I'm playing something in the 80s, but really it's powered by that. So I did start thinking about that this morning.
So do you not have an older PC that has a VGA out?
Oh yeah, I've got loads of older PCs that have VGA out, but
okay.
they don't run. I don't.
They wouldn't have
Launchbox.
I get it. Okay.
So what I'd have is I'd have like a decent-ish, smallish monitor for reading the documentation and looking at the browsies and feelies, and next to it I've got the real amber thing. It did get me thinking. There's an excuse to go and buy yet another CRT.
What would your keyboard of choice be? I mean, playing text adventures, that's got to be right too, right?
Well, I have right next here to me.
Yep.
Can you hear it?
Yep, I can see it too. Is that a Model M?
That's a Model M.
Yeah, there we go.
Model M.
Yeah, I thought it was, because at first I thought it was a desk, and then I realised it was a keyboard. Yeah, so it had to be a Model M.
So yeah, I think this is fantastic. And as is usual with all EXO projects, they pick a front cover for it and slightly alter something, and this is what they've done. You can see here the lost treasures of Infocom, and my glamorous assistant is showing you both of them on his stand behind you. These are great big thick boxes. The first one is absolutely full of the feelies and browsies, a reasonable reproduction of them, of what you got from the original Infocom games. This is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much to the Vital Exo projects. I cannot encourage listeners enough to dive into these projects. They're absolutely magic. We are sponsored this week. Thank you very much to Pixel Addict magazine. Pixel Addict are an amazing magazine. They are Britain's best-selling tech history magazine. They cover lots of different things. They cover games, they cover old systems, hardware, as well as things from that era that we might remember as well. The current issue is issue 33. It's got Monty Mole on the front. Wonderful cover, and there's lots in it.
There's a feature on vintage computer file transfer. We always need to move data between our retro systems. A take on an old topic, but hey, the Sega Saturn, did the underdog miss its chance against the PlayStation? And a topic that's going to be of interest very soon, a multi-part series. This is part 9 on Sony PlayStation coding, although I might have a cheat code for that coming up a little bit later in the show.
PlayStation coding, that sounds very interesting. I'd like to know more about that, Jason.
Well, you definitely would head on over to addict.media, get your single issue, or hey, get an annual subscription. They'll start you right off, get you that PDF right away, and get you many more issues, if by many more you mean every 6 weeks or so.
Yeah. Posted through your letterbox, or if you're not in a country that has letterboxes, shoved in that thing you see in films and TVs, that mailbox.
Yeah.
And the little flag pushed up. Do you push the flag up or does it dig down?
We put the flag up if you want them to take something away. So you don't do that when you've got your copy of...
Oh, so that's not to signal you put something to collect from the box, no.
They take it from your house. That's how the post... That's awesome.
It's pretty great.
Wow.
Amazing.
You'd have to go to the post office. Far out. We should all move to America. Right.
Addict.media.
And if you want to sponsor an upcoming episode of This Week in Retro, write to us. I say write to us, but I mean email us. Email us at tour@thisweekinretro.com. Or you could write it in crayon and then take a picture and email that.
We talk a fair bit about the history of game engines on this show, which is engines in a code sense, not in the Chris sense of taking a 3-cylinder Geometro internal combustion engine and strapping it to a big wheel. You need to watch that episode, Chris.
Yes.
Because the evolution of game engines encouraged so much growth and refinement. By the end of the 1980s, there were game engines including Infocom Z Machine and the LucasArts SCUM system, and those let developers write game logic just once and then run it on several platforms, but there was still frequently a lot of fiddly work that had to be done writing the interpreter, the front end for each of those target platforms, especially anything that was graphical. Now, fast forward a couple of decades, though, and then you start to get to systems of all shapes and sizes where you write the code once, you load your assets in once, you push one button, and you get fully playable binaries on a whole host of platforms and now browsers. This innovation put a bit of a dent in the golden age of Kickstarter stretch goals because eventually people figured out that, the big target of we'll add Mac support means we'll push the checkbox that says we want a Mac version too, but, hey. Now, by and large, these contemporary game engines, like the Unity platform, probably the best known one, are meant for modern or, modern-ish platforms. At least they were, until a Czech developer who goes by the name of Bandwidth put his hand to it with the latest release of PSX Splash. Now, this is a front end which makes it possible to create runnable games, or, I suppose non-games as well. You could do a word processor in it if you really put your mind to it, using the contemporary Unity engine. That's right, the same Unity engine behind countless modern titles can now output fresh new titles for 1995's hottest console, the original Sony PlayStation. Apparently, there had been some preliminary releases of this, but this new release of PSX Splash is substantially improved. You can now do all of the scripting in Lua, which is a much more approachable language, rather than requiring work in C or C++ under the hood. PSX Splash and the Splash Edit front end take care of a lot of the dirty work that's needed to make a game work well or work at all on the PlayStation, and that includes texture management, automatic conversion of assets to like the PS1's 24-channel audio format, and an emulation environment so that you can check your work as you go before you go through the steps of creating a burnable ISO file or sending the title over a serial connection to a real PlayStation. So all of these PSX Splash tools are posted on GitHub under the permissive MIT license, permissive in a good way, meaning go ahead and use it and you're not, kind of shooting yourself in the foot. And there's documentation for the project as well as a Discord server that they say is pretty active. Now, Bandwidth himself took to YouTube recently to implore developers to take a chance on this Unity plugin he's created to show off what's possible with a 2026 game engine. A lot of times when a project like this will launch, it will have some sample titles, but he in so many words says, like, I can do this. I'm not a game developer. I really need people to help do some proofs of concept for this. So would PSX Splash make it easy to design for the comparatively slow and resource-constrained PlayStation? Probably not, but it's definitely going to be easier. So guys, whether it's a demake or simply I'd like to see what this, gaming mechanic looked like on the PlayStation. Is there a game or a genre of game you'd like to see somebody bring over to the original PlayStation using this system?
One of my favorite ports of Doom was for the PlayStation. I thought that was a fantastic port. So I will ask for a demake of Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal just for a laugh. Or how about let's improve the Atari Jaguar's best ever game, AVP, and port that to the system instead. So, yeah, that'd be a nice project.
That'd be very appropriate.
Modern RPGs are too big, too bloated, and systems older than the PlayStation are not powerful enough. So this represents a nice bit of tech that's powerful enough to do lots and lots, but not so powerful that games end up too big and too focused on graphical assets and so on. So give me a Bethesda-style game like Elder Scrolls or Fallout 3, but bring it down to 1995's level so that you can get the story, the exploration, all the rest of it, but without without it just being a graphical thing or a controller-based thing. Perhaps Jeff Vogel would be the one to do that.
Or Elder Scrolls 1 Arena or Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall. Yeah, something like that.
Well, yeah, they focus too much on the procedural generation of massive worlds, which you could live in. I want a game that I'm in and done and feel satisfied with after maybe 20, 30 hours.
So thanks to Naoki's28 for submitting the PSX Splash story. And speaking of new tricks for once hot consoles, we've talked a fair bit about the Nintendo Wii and its PowerPC architecture. Note to Chris, PowerPC continues to be the CPU in the Wii.
And going to the moon.
Yes. All your bigs, all your major technology bigs of the 21st century. Or flying by the moon. I will stand by my remarks on that. Antiques for Geeks posted news of an incredible and incredibly weird hack, which is porting the original public version of Mac OS X, which we recently talked about its 25th anniversary. This is the so-called Cheetah 10.0 release, and it's been ported to the Wii. Now, to put it mildly,
crying out for it for years. Everybody's wanted this.
Yeah, it was right up there with getting Netflix support. To put it mildly, this is not a thing that either Nintendo nor Apple ever wanted anybody to do. But Brian Keller, the hacker who has accomplished this feat, talks about how important discouragement of others was to motivating his success. Now, I know that Wii soft modding was relatively trivial, but as far as I could tell in my limited exploration, you were still kind of largely in the Nintendo front-end launcher. Like, you weren't replacing the OS, you were just running more fun stuff. The steps involved in doing this are both extensive and extensively documented, and it involves Brian's work looking through open source elements of Mac OS that are available through the Darwin project. And to be clear, Darwin is not a fully working Mac OS X by any means. They open sourced the stuff they had to, and there's a lot of good stuff that they keep hidden. But it also involved writing new device drivers, working around the operating system's desire to have 128 megs of RAM. The Wii has less, and he explains how it's carved up into weird chunks. There are also photos of Brian hacking away on what appears to be an airline flight to Hawaii. He's got his MacBook dev machine on the tray table in front of him and a Wii running on the tray table in the middle seat, which is hilarious and weird and honestly feels like the kind of thing that you get asked about after the flight in a small windowless room, but apparently all was fine. I recommend that you look at the project and his narrative, even if you don't particularly care for Mac OS or the Wii for that matter, or don't care about the ability to run a very old operating system on an almost as old and underpowered console. I do want to share here an edited version of his closing remarks because it's really such a great expression of the timeless hacker ethic. There's something deeply satisfying about accomplishing something that at the start you weren't even sure was possible. Last year, when I saw that Windows NT had been ported to the Wii, I felt a renewed sense of motivation. Even if my lack of low-level experience resulted in failure, attempting this project would still be an opportunity to learn something new. In the end, I learned and accomplished far more than I ever expected. And perhaps more importantly, I was reminded that the projects that seem just out of reach are exactly the ones worth pursuing. So you guys, you ever pull off a public tech flex, like busting out a whole Wii console on a flight?
No. I do remember I was always a little bit ahead with tech until now I'm behind. But I do remember flying to America with all the various different devices, my electronic ink reader, my phone, my tablet, and my headphones and all the rest of it, and feeling just a wee bit more than what other people had. And I wonder if anyone looked at me a little bit suspiciously, but not to the same degree as that, no.
I kind of have. Not to that degree, no. Maybe it's more similar to yours, Dave. But while everybody was rocking iPads, I had the Asus Transformer with a keyboard dock, and I loved pulling that out on the train because it looked like a small laptop / notebook. And so everybody thought you were behind the 8-ball, and then for no reason whatsoever, I'd undock it and continue in tablet mode. And of course, everybody would wow around me. In fact, nobody even looked over. They were probably ignoring me, looking at their iPads quite happily. But for me, it was like, oh, this is so much better than an iPad. So that's my tech flex.
And since I do enjoy having operating system news on the show, I do want to briefly remark on a submission from OKM 894. It pointed to TechSpot, but I'm just going to go straight to the Microsoft dev blog that's operated by longtime Windows developer Raymond Chen. Now, the headline was very tantalizing. Some Windows 3.1 apps were simply too evil for Windows 95 to support, says Microsoft veteran. But as it turns out, Chen was not making a moral judgment. This was just about like poorly behaved programs written for Windows 3.1, or even going back as far as Windows 2.0, which were either doing very non-compliant things that couldn't be accommodated in the Win95 operating model, or did a non-compliant thing, but then did it poorly. So for example, they weren't even bothering to check the version of Windows correctly. And so they would mistake Windows 95 for Windows 2 and do workarounds incorrectly. So little bit there in the Raymond Chen tech blog, which is a kind of a blend of modern Windows coding tips and, hey, this is what we were doing 30 years ago.
I do want to kind of stand up a bit for Microsoft here. Not a lot, but a bit. Windows has always been kind of the bottom of the hill for support and stuff. Everything rolls down and has to run on Windows. Apple will happily say, no, it's gone now. You can't have it. And they support a tiny amount of hardware relative to what Windows has to support. And Windows has been the main operating system for decades now, and it's left having to support all sorts of legacy stuff that doesn't do things right, and it just works on the system it was designed for, and anything afterwards, they make changes or get compliant, it doesn't work. And Microsoft ends up getting the stick, no matter what they do. If they cut support for old stuff, it's terrible. What are you doing? It costs us money. And if they don't, then it's insecure and wobbly. Of course, they don't get it perfect, but I think the internet perception of them is not quite as accurate as it could be. All that said, I don't like the way Windows is going down the freemium route and trying to pay for itself with ads and marketing and selling data and all the rest of it. But I think they maybe get a little bit of a bad reputation. And that story about the evil Windows 3.1 stuff kind of highlights the kind of software that Windows has to support or has to cut out and people get angry about.
True. Jumping back to the Mac OS story, actually, Jason, that does remind me about, obviously, Hackintoshes have been a thing for a while. And that's just reminded me of, I had a mate who had a Dell laptop running full Mac OS. And it was simply because the spec inside this particular model of Dell, I can't remember what the model was, but it pretty much matched the Apple laptop of the moment. And therefore, you could quite easily just install Mac OS and off you went. You didn't even have to do much jiggery-pokery to get it to work. And I recall him actually doing a tech flex by popping that out in the bar in the hotel in Bali when a bunch of us were over there. And that was his tech flex while the rest of us were playing pool. So, yeah.
So Dave, to your point, I mean, you are absolutely right. And the fact that Microsoft has been you can basically still run. You may still be able to run a Windows 2.0 program from the late 80s, on something that's as late as Windows Millennium or whatever. Like that has been to their credit. And I think the fact that Apple pivoted to be nope, we're going to cut you off every 6 years and move on, like that became their market niche. They weren't going to win against Microsoft being the compatible ones.
Although there's a kind of irony in that Apple's new M silicon had to have a really good way of running the old x86 stuff on a platform that isn't x86, and they absolutely hammered it. They got it done so well that now the Apple are the best ones at kind of supporting old stuff in certain ways. And I think it's changed the way that people look at things. And now the old stuff is saying, well, run it in a virtual machine.
Yeah, and we'll see if and when they start peeling back support for Intel. They do usually get people through for a few years. For a few years you could run your 68K stuff on PowerPC. A few years you could run your PowerPC stuff on Intel. We'll see how that goes. The other thing I wanted to point out about the poorly behaved Windows 3.1 applications from the Microsoft perspective is that I have a very strong feeling this also might be tied in with, if you remember in the old days, people would say, Microsoft's not correctly documenting the operating system. They're keeping all of the good API calls for themselves. We had to go and dig so that we could come up with something that would work as well. So I do wonder if that, Raymond Chen's version is these were naughty coders doing naughty things. Those people might be saying, yeah, we had to do it because they wouldn't tell us how it worked. But we'll see. Maybe that'll come out as more people read this story. Anyway, are we on the cusp of a PlayStation 24-hour game jam, a renaissance in software development specifically designed for the strengths of macOS running on Wii? If you see signs of either, please let us know on our subreddit, reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. And the Birthday Jubilee review drive continues. Please help us get to 50 new reviews in Duncan's 50th year. We found the latest on Apple Podcasts US feed. Thanks to Is2Scooby for making This Week in Retro part of your weekend ritual.
We've got some more guests coming up. We had 3 fantastic guests from the Pacific coast of America who we couldn't get in with the 3 of us being here. So with Chris on drinking leave, we got them in. 3 fantastic guests. We've got even more guests coming up. I thought we were going to take a cool off and guess a bit, but no, we've got loads to fit in. So some interesting guests coming up. If you do want to support us, if you want to say thanks to what we do, if you want to, then you can go to patreon.com/thisweekinretro and become an official twirler. We do periodic bits of extra content for you. We've got something to do shortly, I think. We'll have something to do for April. So we need to talk about that, but thank you for our patrons for the support. Now, on to news in brief, and there is a huge update for PicoGus, the Swiss Army knife Pico-based ISA card that started out by just doing the Gravis ultrasound. It now does Sound Blaster 16 and Pro, making it even more amazing than it was. This is the solution if you need sound in an ISA card. You can get an old motherboard that has an ISA slot in it for not very much money, but getting a sound card is more expensive than the motherboard in some cases, especially if it's a Gravis ultrasound. It's ultra expensive, but now you can have it all there. So thank you to Popo himself for letting the subreddit know he is the guy behind it all. The project is incredible.
Old version is back, thanks to G7VFY, who tells us that this project, which is a repository of out-of-date software, that still does a job for you. Thanks to support following a Hackaday article, there's now enough money to keep it going, and it's even had a facelift in Windows 3.1 style.
And the creator of Double Dragon, Yoshihisa Kishimoto, has passed away. Thank you to OKM894 for letting us know. His creations will, of course, outlive him as his legacy, and there's a new Amiga port of it coming, which looks much closer to the arcade than the original.
42 Nobody 42 links us to the Scroller, which has 20 pictures of what arcades actually used to look like. So then we can actually work out if they did all have that weird carpet that we seem to associate with the 80s.
Yeah, there's different types of arcades. American arcades were different than UK just because of how things developed in the two countries. They were quite different. And then you had the bowling alley style arcades, which had that carpet and the neon lights and so on. Lots of different types of arcades, yeah. On the same theme, arcade machines are the boats of retro. In other words, they are expensive and difficult to own and maintain. Next day, 2576 lets us know about his newly published arcade manual archive, a searchable archive of over 7,800 arcade machine specs and 2,400 manuals and schematics. One interesting feature is the cross-referencing capabilities, which might clue you in as to a possible donor source for parts for a misbehaving older machine. Check that out at arcadertfm.com. What does that stand for?
Read the friendly manual.
Yes, read the friendly manual. Yeah,
That's
always friendly. Famous for being friendly.
Squelch411 let us know that one of our recent guests, YouTube host Little Car, published a short video creating a breakout-style game in BASIC on the Sinclair ZX81, not a speed demon of a machine. It's not fantastic, but considering the platform, we will call it playable, and it even has a little Super Zapper power-up feature. And finally, your Intel 486-based computer is finally obsolete, I'm afraid. According to a recent XDA developers article submitted by Squelch411, the core Linux kernel may be removing support for the 486 architecture in its upcoming version 7.1. Now, this won't shut down anybody's currently running system. It'll just kind of curtail the ability to stay current. Long-term support for abandoned CPUs on Linux has been negotiated once before, so stay tuned. And of course, if you would like to contribute stories, reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro to submit, upvote, downvote, comment, and keep track.
Yeah, so we have the cutting edge. Apple makes things obsolete too quick. We have Microsoft gives it a bit longer, and then Linux says, whatever. 30 years old, that's still fine.
That may come up in the next story.
1989 was apparently when the first 486 chips shipped.
Yeah, nobody had them in 1989. Yeah. I mean, those were super expensive workstation chips. It took like 5 years for them to filter down to normal people. But yeah.
89, the year of the Commodore Amiga. Prior to going on leave, I recorded some videos for my own channel and scheduled them to release 1 week apart. The last of which was an update for my Pentium 3 build, which is one of my original machines from around 2001. I think I built that machine. The build is nearly where I want it, running Windows 98 and a heap of games and software, and even my original wallpaper images that I created myself. And mostly, that software has been reinstalled from original disks and backups that I made in 2002. A couple of things do need tidying up. I need to reinstall the original sound card and source and install some game patches, and then gaming-wise, it's pretty much done. But I also used this machine back in the day to do 3D modeling and animation using Infinity and 3D Studio Max, and video editing using Premiere. And of course, for that and video project exports as well, I used a FireWire card, which is still in the machine to this day. So I need to get all that software installed and make sure the drivers are working for the FireWire card and ensure that everything is good to go, because I want to revisit that part of that machine's history as well. Actually, before I move on, guys, to the main part of this story, what's the oldest original rig from your past that you still own, and what do you use it for, Jason?
So, I mean, I do still own my original C64 floppy drive and monitor from 1985, but neither's in regular use. So if you want a thing that's like still in my daily driver setup, like something I'm still using today.
Well, no, because I mean, this won't be a daily driver even once it's done. It's still just a retro revisit.
Okay, but I mean, I could, my keyboard is over 22 years old. It was a fairly low-end HP USB keyboard, and a lot of the keycaps are worn off, but it's over 22 years old. The desk that it sits on is coming up on 30 later this month. My Cambridge Soundworks 2.1 speaker set is somewhere in between those two, probably about 25, 26 years old.
Very nice.
For me, the oldest thing that I think is probably a double O's, a Naughty's PC that I gave to my dad, and which has become a ship of Theseus or a Trigger's broom. There won't be anything that's the same other than the case. Everything will have been changed over time. Around 2003, when I started water cooling things, I water cooled everything from 2003 up to last year when I got rid of my last water cooled thing. You have to strip it down, and then that means you don't have the same thing anymore. But I do have my NAS in a great big black aluminium Lian Li V2000B style case. It's not a V2000B, it's a similar one to that. I don't know the model number. I got it in the double O's, the Naughties as well, secondhand in mint condition, and it's held my NAS ever since. But of course, all the parts inside have changed, but it still looks amazing.
As long as the case is the same. Yep, triggers broom. Interesting, because this piece, the only reason I have that P3 is because I gave it to my dad, and then now I have it back again. So, yep, similar story. For those who don't know or never went full nerd in the 90s, there were composite to USB devices like there are now, but because USB was slow, you'd end up with drop frames all over the place. So the main way to get footage off of or back onto a digital tape was via FireWire. Fast forward to the present day, and USB is fast, and FireWire in comparison is now slow, resulting in support being dropped in Windows 11, and also Apple is phasing out support for it as well. Anyone into digitizing microfiche will be well aware of this pain, because lots of microfiche machines actually use FireWire, and they're very expensive to replace with the newer ones. But retro videoing is in vogue, not just for people like us into old tech, but in other areas as well, like skate videos. Apparently they like the 90s look on their videos, and also car meets, that kind of thing. And it's much easier to just use an old camera than it is to try and fake the old camera look in post-production. But just like floppy disks, hard drives, and optical media, there are challenges sourcing the media itself, maintaining mechanical drives, and keeping everything working. And that's why this project by YouTuber Jeff Geerling, shared with us by SDMat22, got my attention. Basically, because there's still Linux support for FireWire, Jeff has been able to create a direct capture card using a Pi, a FireHat, which is a FireWire adapter board for the Pi, and a Pi Sugar battery pack to make the whole thing portable and camera mountable. Is this replacing the tape? Well, no, this isn't a GoTech for mini DV cameras. So let's be clear about that. What this actually allows is direct to SD recording for DV cameras that allow recording direct to FireWire. So if the camera doesn't have that feature, then no, this isn't going to work.
So let me make sure I understood this right. The cameras, you could be recording on them directly onto your computer. That was designed to do directly onto your computer. But now you can record directly onto a portable Raspberry Pi setup, meaning that you can take these things around and record onto Pi.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
correct. Yeah,
Brilliant.
correct. Yep. So basically it means, you can record on a 90s DV camera direct to file, and rather than having to capture the footage off in real time like we used to do from tape, you can then just dump the files created on the SD card like you would your phone or your modern camera. In fact, Jeff comments that because of the wireless connection on the Pi, he can just transfer the files across his network, and that actually makes this solution better than his modern video camera. So what do you make of this, guys? And what's next for the Pi jumping to the rescue to save any old kit? What niche do you think needs covering that we haven't thought about for the Pi? Jason?
Yeah, I'm not sure what my answer is to the latter question, but this solution is hilarious in a good way. And I'm not a huge video guy, but I was around and kind of peripherally involved when DV cameras and FireWire were kind of becoming mainstream, and it was a very cool form of tech magic. To Chris's point, you were still kind of bound by linear tape speed, but it was so much better than old school analog tape digitizing, because that would introduce artifacts and lossy elements. I do still have a DVD player recorder, something around here that does offer a DV connection, and I have used it. It must have been a recorder, because I think I transferred something directly from DV tape to DVD. Of course, I do have some Macs old enough to have FireWire. I think at least one low-profile PC as well that has FireWire. And then, of course, some old Sony Vaio laptops that had Sony's rebadged version of the standard. But yeah, just really cool example of using a cheap Pi to solve a problem created by out-of-date tech.
My top 3 innovations in retro are Mr. EXO and using Pi devices to fill holes like this. These Pi device things come up again and again. They're all so important for different reasons. And here's an example of another one. Using the Pi as the middleman, allowing tech that is still perfectly usable, which of course this is, to be used despite the other tech it relies on being obsolete. Or it means you can fill gaps that are super expensive to make cheap hardware work and still feel authentic. I wish I could remember when I saw it, but I saw a few days ago, it was modern footage, but it was taken with an older camera, and my brain immediately processed it as old footage from 25 years ago. You couldn't watch it and not tell yourself, yeah, this was recorded 25 years ago. It's just how things look. And I don't know exactly how all that works. I'm sure camera people could probably explain it to me in a way that might go above my head, but it's absolutely incredible. So what What this will do is enable someone to record stuff that looks perfectly watchable easily and still have it look that way that old stuff looks. I don't know. Amazing.
Yeah. I've tried to fake VHS look on one of the porg meats. It's fun to do, but you can tell it's faked, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I even had a ticker tape running along the bottom that I made in Red Sector Demo Maker to give it that Amiga look, and I warped that to give it make it look like it was on the edge of a CRT. But again, I know it's fake. Everybody else knows it's fake. This is much better. I think the algorithm's been following me as well since I wrote the notes for this story, because what hit my feed today was a device called, which you can buy in the shops now, the CamSnap CS-8 digital video camera, which is basically a modern digital video that is made to look like a Super 8 video camera. So everybody's going into this retro videoing niche, which is quite interesting. To make this work, though, the Pi solution work, Jeff has put in lots of work coding and developing this solution up, and it even includes an LCD panel and user menu on the Fire Hat so that you can see your remaining battery life, your recording time remaining to the SD card, and you've got controls for starting and stopping separate recordings. And everything needed seems to be available, so do check out his video and blogs. All links, as always, will be included in the show notes. On now to the community question of the week, and the previous question was, the Voyager mission sent an analog record into space to help aliens understand us. Was it Hoffman's record being played at the wrong speed? Probably not, because that's what 1970s tech allowed. Today, we can send a radiation-hardened solar-powered laptop on a probe. What would you load onto that laptop so the aliens would understand humanity? So I think we're out of contest mode. Is that right, guys?
Yep. We are.
Fantastic. Who's the top answer from?
So Ben J. Cayman J says, SETI at home for them to decode their own communication signals, which I think misses the vital point. We need to know they're out there. So now aliens can send a signal, decode it themselves, and just miss us out of the whole process, which is maybe a good thing. And I remember reading, Stephen Hawking said if aliens find us, we're doomed.
Oh, for sure.
Doomed.
If they find us rather than us finding them, absolutely.
Yeah.
Electric Pause says the offline version of Wikipedia, the Gutenberg Library, a torrent downloaded copy of War Games containing DVD RIP in the file name, Balance of Power running in WinUAE, an MP3 version of Taylor Swift's song 22, but with the number 42 used instead, of course. My phone number so they can text me the secret to understanding humanity, as I can't work it out. There we go. Plenty on the laptop.
Uh-huh. I see why you jumped the queue, because the third answer down is from Antiques for Geeks. Some people were inspired to really write. We seem to have a little bit of Douglas Adams pastiche going here. Here we go. And in an embarrassing mix-up with two identical laptops owned by the different members of the probe team, instead of a device being loaded that contained universal messages of peace from world leaders, fine audio examples of our culture's music and language, visuals that conveyed the beauty of the Earth, etc., the residents of Alpha Centauri were instead introduced to videos of cats being startled by cucumbers. This led to an awkward first contact situation years later, where the Alpha Centurion battle fleet arrived and declared war on the Earth's pickles, determined to assist the planet's feline overlords. From the Encyclopedia Galactica 7th edition.
The only reason that I know that isn't actual Douglas Adams is because videos of cats came after Douglas Adams.
Yes.
Other than that, I would have believed it was him.
I assume if we're setting a laptop up, it's going to be a Mac, right? Because Independence Day taught me one thing, and that's that Macs, while incompatible with everything on Earth, were perfectly compatible with the mothership from the invading aliens. So it's got to be a MacBook, right?
New question for next week. We'd like you to answer this. Now that PSX Splash makes it easier to develop for the Sony PlayStation in the Unity engine, what game or genre are you hoping will return to 1995's hottest console? Answers on a postcard, the usual address. Alternatively, you can go to the subreddit, www.http:// You can go to reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro and submit your answer there.
Yep. And it's my birthday, so my birthday present to myself is I'm just going to sit with my hands folded as the show ends.
It's your birthday. Happy birthday, Jason.
Thank you very much.
Happy birthday.
I'm waving. Chris,
I'm
are you
waving. I'm waving to Jason for his birthday.
Yeah. Happy birthday, Jason.
Thank you both.
See you all next week.
He's not waving. He's really not waving.
He's waving in spirit.
Yeah.
This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 AGIMA, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. Please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.